now.
Great, great, thank you. So, just briefly about Wallace Stevens. Wallace Stevens is a poet that I know somewhat less well, and frankly, like somewhat less, partly, although I know Douglas just loves him, um, than I do Williams or even Eliot or Whitman or Dickinson. But I think that's because, well, whatever. It's because he's very abstract, but not in what we're going to talk about today. Stevens lived from 1879 to 1955. He was born into a Dutch Reformed Church family in Reading, Pennsylvania. And as a child, he was quite religious. He went to parochial school until about sixth grade. Then he started public school. He was a voracious reader, really excellent student. Went to Harvard, where he won every writing prize that an undergrad could win. For the first few years of his time there, he ended up studying Greek and Latin and also became the editor of the Harvard Monthly. He started publishing poems both in the Advocate and the Harvard Monthly as an undergrad, but he had to withdraw for financial reasons. His family couldn't continue to send him there. So for a while, he worked as a newspaper editor. He wanted to move to Paris and just be a writer, an expat. But his father apparently said to him, "Look, you need to be able to earn money." So he entered law school, went to New York School of Law from 1901 to 1904, and became an insurance lawyer. So I have a cartoon that has two people talking at a cocktail party, and one of them says, "Wallace Stevens, was he the doctor or the insurance lawyer?" And so you guys get that joke. Yay! Two famous American poets who primarily had other jobs as well. In 1909, he married a woman that his parents disapproved of because she was a working class girl named Elsie Viola Kachel, Kachel. And apparently, this was not a happy marriage, um, especially as time went on. It took them something like 15 years to have a child, which is indicative of something or other. Wasn't writing poetry so much during these years, but he was part of this would-be artistic renaissance that people like William Carlos Williams and Alfred Stieglitz and um, Martha Graham and Georgia O'Keeffe and others were trying to get going in New York to counter the renaissance of the arts that was happening among the expatriates. Stevens was he was living in New York City and spending a lot of time with these people and discussing poetry, championing poetry, and so on. He was good friends both with William Carlos Williams and with Mary Ann Moore. He also had a kind of rivalry with Williams. He accused Williams of being anti-poetic, and Williams insisted a poem can be made of anything. But they had very, very different aesthetic tastes, as you can tell. Stevens was
What
kind
do you
of
mean by to counter the expat thing, Anne?
because this was the era, Henry James and Edith Wharton moved to Europe. They were famous writers. And then after that, um, Hemingway went to Europe, Pound went to Europe, Eliot went to Europe, H.D. went to Europe. Um, um, what's her name? Gertrude Stein went to Europe. All these writers were moving to Europe because they felt that America was a cultural wasteland. They felt that we did not have fine traditions, we did not have an aristocracy, we did not have nobility, we did not have cathedrals, we did not have a whole history of brilliance in letters, Shakespeare and so on. And so they went to Europe and they were quite frank about it. But the American artists, the ones who stayed in America, said, like Whitman, America, and like Emerson, America is a poem in our eyes. They said, we have incredible um, potential here for the arts. We have incredible potential for arts that are grounded in this place, in this soil, in these traditions. If you guys know, for instance, Martha Graham's dance, Appalachian Spring, really famous dance choreographed, celebrating Appalachian culture, right? Or you think about Williams's writing, of the people who lived in Rome with patience. You think about, yeah, Douglas?
Yeah, was that choreographed to Copeland's
Yeah,
piece, Appalachian Spring?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. And you think about, for instance, the photography of Alfred Stieglitz or the paintings of Marianne Moore, and you just think, okay, these are people they're deliberately working together. They're getting together. They're all in New York until they move elsewhere, or Williams is coming over from Rutherford, New Jersey, and they're having meetings and they're talking and they're having shows. Stieglitz made his gallery open for exhibitions, and they're celebrating each other's work and they're helping other people get started. So they very deliberately wanted to ground an artistic renaissance in the United States rather than just simply saying, oh, we're so poor, we're so culturally illiterate, all the good stuff happens in Europe,
You know,
you know?
I I just happened to see a video by Italian tourist who she was maybe 40 and she was over here and she posted a video about she'd been taught her whole life that America had no culture.
Uh-huh.
She was going this and this is now.
Yeah.
And
Well, we're
she
not going
said,
to have culture much longer, but we still do for the most.
"Oh, I don't know about that, but
But we'll
I
have a lot of
trust
oil.
the artist. The artist will not be silenced."
Yeah.
But anyway, she said that's ridiculous. America has all this culture, and she named a bunch of things that aren't classically considered culture. Because that's well, I mean, tell me all the really gigantic rock and roll bands that have come out of Italy or jazz musicians that have come out of Italy. So
hmm
that's not culture, though. So anyway, that's what she'd been taught to this day.
Yeah. Well, this is a really old argument. People even back in the Puritan era were arguing about this. What can be founded here,
Really?
can be based here. Yeah. It's just an old argument. Yeah. So Stevens, as I said, was not for some years publishing much poetry, but he joined in 1916. He joined the Hartford Accident and Indemnity Company in Hartford, Connecticut, and he stayed there for the rest of his working life. He became the vice president of the company in 1934. So he was wealthy. He, moved among businessmen and the kind of upper middle classes. He was very politically conservative, unlike Williams, like T.S. Eliot, you know. But then in 1915, Stevens began to publish poetry again, important poetry. He published both Peter Quince at the Clavier, which is one of his most famous poems, and Sunday Morning, which I think of as his absolutely quintessential poem and his best poem. In 1916, he published Le Monocle de mon oncle. And in 1923, so he's pretty old for this, not as old as some people I could name, namely me, but he published his first book of poetry, Harmonium, which did not attract that much attention at the time. Many critics felt it was needlessly obscure, needlessly difficult, needlessly fancy, that it did not, touch down to ordinary people, ordinary diction, and so on. But Stevens's star has continued to rise ever since then. Okay. In 1933, he published Ideas of Order, which has, among other things, a poem that we'll be looking at, an important poem called Ideas of Order at Key West. And I'm just going to rattle off some more titles. In 1937, he published The Man with the Blue Guitar and other poems. In 1942, Parts of a World. It's beautiful titles. He's the greatest titler in the world. 1947, Transport to Summer. 1950, The Auroras of Autumn. And these late books they're very difficult. They're about the imagination, they're about poetry. They tend to be philosophical and fairly abstract. 1960, he published, or posthumously, a book of his essays, The Necessary Angel came out. 1954, 1982, collected poems. So Stevens died in 1955 of cancer, but shortly before that, in 1955, He won both a Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award for collected poems. Already in 1951, he had won the National Book Award for Auroras of Autumn. He received many honorary degrees. He was by this time in his life, highly recognized as one of our most important poets. And he's received a lot of important criticism by, Helen Vendler and Harold Bloom and people like that. One thing I did want to mention that I mentioned in an email, there's a great series called Voices and Visions that NPR put out probably many years ago by now. And they're hour-long programs about American poets. And the one on Stevens, I remember as being like, especially the part about auroras of autumn being particularly beautiful, like really just mysteriously powerful and beautiful. So I wanted to mention that because you can probably still find those, online. Stevens's two great themes, which he reiterates through his whole poetic career, are the relationship between reality and the imagination. One of his most famous essays, The Noble Writer and the Sound of Words, is all about that. And also the theme of poetry. Poetry in a world that does not have God. This is a theme that he shares with James Joyce. The poet becomes the priest when the priest, no longer has the power of recognized religion behind him. And Stevens comes back to these themes over and over and over, not in every single case, but very, very often. So I want to talk about a couple of his short poems, his pretty accessible poems to start us off. And then I want to go through Sunday Morning with You, which I think is just an absolutely gorgeous poem and which really lays out these themes that I've been talking about. So we'll start with really simple little poem, Disillusionment of 10 o'clock. The houses are haunted by white nightgowns. None are green or purple with green rings or green with yellow rings or yellow with blue rings. None of them are strange with socks of lace and beaded centaurs. People are not going to dream of baboons and periwinkles. Only here and there, an old sailor drunk and asleep in his boots catches tigers in red weather. Because the charming poem is from Harmonium. And it lays out what? This theme of the absolute sexless, sterile boringness of conventional, respectable, middle class America that goes to bed at 10 o'clock in its white nightgowns. And then what's missing? These great color words, he's talking about something really serious here, but he's talking about it in a really simple way using color words, right? None of the nightgowns are red, none of them are blue, none of them are green, none of them have polka dots, none of them have socks of lace. Nobody goes to bed wearing lace socks and beaded waistbands, you know? And they're all safely asleep, tucked in their beds like Ma and Pa. Only here and there, an old sailor, drunk and asleep in his boots, catches tigers in red weather. That straddles both sides of Stevens's personality as well, because as a Hartford Insurance Company vice president, he's the kind of guy that wore a suit every day, and yet he would go home at night and retire to his study, his library, and write this amazing, almost like art for art's sake poetry. He was a connoisseur of Asian paintings, a connoisseur of fine tea. He was highly literate, highly read, and he just had this double life, which I think was a cause of some pain to him. He also spent much time in Florida over a period of about a dozen years. And he writes about Florida as akin to the drunken old sailors in their red weather. He writes about Florida as balmy and warm and rich and strange. And then he comes back to Hartford, Connecticut, which is puritanical. And I mean, I'm in Massachusetts right now. I'm looking out the window at snow, you know, white, um, prosperous, but not exciting. Okay. Now, I think the way to read Stevens is to realize what a brilliant master of words he is, and not always to try to make sense of what he's talking about, because he's not going to make sense all the time. Sometimes, if you read and then reread and reread, there's a meaning that starts, sort of sinking in, like sinking to the bottom of your memory. And it's very eloquent. But he's not the kind of poet who's going to deliver his meanings in a straightforward way most of the time. But he's going to evoke powerful, powerful moods. And his command of language is just overwhelmingly beautiful. So the next poem that I want to look at with you is Disillusionment. Hang on. No, not Disillusionment. I'm sorry. Domination of Black. Domination of Black. And I think this is one of his most beautiful poems. So just listen to it and let it just evoke a mood. At night, by the fire, the colors of the bushes and of the fallen leaves repeating themselves turned in the room like the leaves themselves turning in the wind. Yes, but the color of the heavy hemlocks came striding, and I remembered the cry of the peacocks. The colors of their tails were like the leaves themselves turning in the wind, in the twilight wind. They swept over the room just as they flew from the boughs of the hemlocks. Down to the ground, I heard them cry, the peacocks. Was it a cry against the twilight or against the leaves themselves turning in the wind, turning as the flames turned in the fire, turning as the tails of the peacocks turned in the loud fire, loud as the hemlocks full of the cry of the peacocks? Or was it a cry against the hemlocks? Out of the window, I saw how the planets gathered like the leaves themselves turning in the wind. I saw how the night came striding like the color of the heavy hemlocks. I felt afraid, and I remembered the cry of the peacocks. So what? This is a poem about this gathering terror, this kind of existential terror of the darkness. And it repeats itself. Look how often it repeats this turning. It's like the turning becomes vertiginous and it becomes incantatory and it becomes enmeshing as it turns and turns. The colors of the bushes and the fallen leaves repeating themselves turned in the rooms like the leaves turning in the wind. And then you've got the hemlocks. There are very few characters in this poem. There's the hemlocks, the peacocks, the darkness, turning, intensifying, increasing. And then there's this cry, the cry of the peacocks. And if you've heard peacocks, it's a weird cry. Like that. Was it a cry against the hemlocks? That is what is nature crying out against nature? Are the peacocks a stand-in for the human? What's crying out against what? We don't know, but we know how even the planets by the end of this poem are gathering around, turning in the wind. And here comes the night, striding. Whew, God, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm giving myself the phantoids. The night striding like the color of the heavy hemlocks. He says, I felt afraid, and I remembered the cry of the peacocks. Anybody have comments on this poem? I think it's gorgeous.
We have some peacocks uh, down the hill from me is the dump, not not right next to me, but down the hill. and they have a flock of peacocks down there. And I'm not sure. I think it has something to do with recycling, believe it or not. And every once in a while, they get out. They have a party and come up by my house and hang out on my roof or whatever. Uh, that's an unusual thing. I'm not going to be able to write a poem about it, but it's quite an unusual thing. Hello, Laurel.
Yeah, hi, Laurel. Yeah, and the way that at nighttime at dusk they fly up into the trees, these heavy-bodied birds fly up into the
Yeah.
tree, you know, and they're heavy, and then they have this strange cry. I mean, they're beautiful, but you're not seeing all the colors of them when the night comes. You're just seeing the feathers and the leaves and the night. Oh, hi, Otis, you're there too. Nice to see you. So we're going to move on to Sunday morning because I want to have enough time to talk about this poem. Um, and I guess maybe we should screen share for this one, and then we'll come back at the end so everybody can see everybody. Super famous poem. Super famous poem. Does everybody know what a peignoir is?
Yeah.
We are of a generation that knows. You teach this to college kids, and they're like, huh? You know? Okay. So, yes, scoot on down more. There we go. Sunday morning. Complacencies of the peignoir and late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair, and the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug mingle to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice. She dreams a little, and she feels the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe as a calm darkens among water lights. The pungent oranges and bright green wings seem things in some procession of the dead winding across wide water without sound. The day is like wide water without sound, stilled for the passing of her dreaming feet over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre. Scroll down, Tony. Why should she give her bounty to the dead? What is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and in dreams? Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, in pungent fruit and bright green wings, or else in any balm or beauty of the earth, things to be cherished, like the thought of heaven? Divinity must live within herself, passions of rain, or moods in falling snow, grievings in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights. All pleasures and all pains, remembering the bough of summer and the winter branch. These are the measures destined for her soul. Jove in the clouds had his inhuman birth. No mother suckled him, no sweet land gave large mannered motions to his mythy mind. He moved among us as a muttering king, magnificent, would move among his hinds, until our blood, commingling virginal with heaven, brought such requital to desire the very hinds discerned it in a star. Shall our blood fail, or shall it come to be the blood of paradise? And shall the earth seem all of paradise that we shall know? The sky will be much friendlier then than now, a part of labor and a part of pain, and next in glory to enduring love, not this dividing and indifferent blue. She says, I am content when wakened birds before they fly test the reality of misty fields by their sweet questionings. But when the birds are gone and their warm fields return no more, where then is paradise? There is not any haunt of prophecy, nor any old chimera of the grave, neither the golden underground, nor isle melodious where spirits gat them home, nor visionary south, nor cloudy palm remote on heaven's hill, that has endured as April's green endures, or will endure like her remembrance of awakened birds, or her desire for June and evening, tipped by the consummation of the swallow's wings. She says, but in contentment I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. Death is the mother of beauty. Hence from her alone shall come fulfillment to our dreams and our desires. Although she strews the leaves of sure obliteration on our paths, the path sick sorrow took, the many paths where triumph rang its brassy phrase, or love whispered a little out of tenderness. She makes the willow shiver in the sun for maidens who were wont to sit and gaze upon the grass, relinquished to their feet, causes boys to pile new plums and pears on disregarded plate. The maidens taste and stray impassioned in the littering leaves. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? Or do the boughs hang always heavy in that perfect sky, unchanging, yet so like our perishing earth, with rivers like our own that seek for shores, seek for seas they never find, the same receding shores that never touch with inarticulate pang? Why set the pear upon those river banks or spice the shores with odors of the plum? Alas, that they should wear our colors there, the silken weavings of our afternoons, and pick the strings of our insipid lutes. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mothers waiting sleeplessly. Supple and turbulent, a ring of men shall chant in orgy on a summer morn their boisterous devotion to the sun, not as a god, but as a god might be, naked among them like a savage source. Their chant shall be a chant of paradise, out of their blood returning to the sky. And in their chant shall enter, voice by voice, the windy lake wherein their Lord delights, the trees like seraphim, and echoing hills that choir among themselves long afterward. They shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn, and whence they came, and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, the tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering. It is the grave of Jesus where he lay. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky at evening, casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. So let's just come back to see everybody again. Notice the echoes of Keats in this poem. I mean, maybe you didn't notice it, but two things. First of all, the Ode on a Grecian Urn with the description of, when Keats is describing the Grecian urn and he describes the lovers that will never be able to kiss because they're frozen in time. And so this wish for immortality, this wish for art as opposed to life, lacks something incredibly real. And he describes all the people that are left back at the village that we don't see on the urn with its frieze of, maidens and calves and so on. We don't see that, but we know, we can imagine that this village is desolate, waiting for their return. So Stevens is echoing that when he's describing, the seas that, or the rivers that never reach the sea, the shores that never touch. He's describing that. And then if you know Keats's incredibly beautiful Ode to Autumn, which is an acceptance really of his own death when he says, "Where are the songs of spring? Where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too." And I mentioned that's the poem that made Mulhauser choke up in class. But at the end of that, is describing the little gnats and the little tiny birds that rise toward the sky. And here Stevens is describing the pigeons that sink with ambiguous undulations downward to darkness on extended wings. So Stevens is really thinking of Keats in this poem. This poem is not an ode, but it has that quality of hugeness like a great ode. So this poem is in sections. When it was first published, Harriet Monroe accepted it for Poetry Magazine, but she insisted that he leave out two stanzas, which really ruined it. So luckily, he put the stanzas back in. Um, it's very, very even, right? It's in more or less iambic pentameter. The sections are all the same length. The tone is really high. This is high diction, very formal, incredibly beautiful vocabulary, and so on. And what he's doing here is it's similar to those poems that poets used to write, a dialogue of sense and soul. This is not quite the same, but it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue between an entirely fictive she, the other voice, and then the poet answering her. Okay. So it starts out by describing this um, moment, Sunday morning, when nobody's in church. Instead, they're lounging in a rather eloquent and sensuously rich environment, complacencies of the peignoir. A great phrase to start a poem, lounging around in this beautiful frothy lace robe, enjoying late coffee and oranges in a sunny chair, and the green freedom of a cockatoo upon a rug. So this tropical bird, and some people think of it as a pattern on the rug. I think it's a real bird. This freedom to dissipate the holy hush of ancient sacrifice, right? She dreams a little. Her thoughts kind of, turn inward. And she starts thinking about Jesus, about religion, the dark encroachment of that old catastrophe, i.e., the crucifixion, as a calm darkens among water lights. And all of a sudden, everything seems to be part of a procession of the dead winding over the seas to silent Palestine, dominion of the blood and sepulchre, which is to say, what instead of being fully present in this moment of, peignoir, coffee and oranges and cockatoo, her thoughts are pulled away to thoughts of Christianity and thoughts of sacrifice. And then he's imagining speaking to her. Why should she give her bounty to the dead? What is divinity if it can come only in silent shadows and in dreams? The insistence this poem throughout is that divinity must be right here, right now,
Right.
or nowhere, right? And that is going to rely on the evocativeness and the beauty of the imagery. He's got to make us feel that divinity among earthly, mortal things. Shall she not find in comforts of the sun, things to be cherished like the thoughts of heaven? And then this beautiful, beautiful list of lines: divinity must live within herself, passions of rain, or moods in falling snow. These are all things that change. These are all mortal, they're fleeting. Grievings in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms. Gusty emotions, that's a great line break. Gusty emotions on wet roads, on autumn nights. All pleasures and all pains, these are the measures destined for her soul. So this incredible affirmation of life, just as it is, the bitter as well as the sweet, grief as well as joy. And then he starts talking about what, Greek religion, and then moving into Christian religion, until our blood commingling virginal with heaven brought such requital to desire the very hinds discerned it in a star. And then he asks this really important question: shall our blood fail? Or shall it come to see the blood of paradise? shall our blood come to be the blood of paradise. And shall the earth seem all of paradise, that we shall know. And that's the question that this poem is asking. And then, of course, she's got to come back and she says, I'm content when things are great. I'm content when the birds are singing, when the birds are gone and their warm fields return no more, where then is paradise? And he turns to evoke memory, the memory of April's green, the memory of her remembrance of awakened birds, and then also the recurrence of April's green, and also her desire for June and evening, tipped by the consummation of the swallow's wings. So those are not precisely the thing itself, but they are the memory of the thing itself, the desire for the thing itself, and the faith that that beauty will recur in time. And then here she is again. She says, but in contentment, I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. And this great line, famous line, death is the mother of beauty, which is to say what? If nothing ever died, if nothing ever changed, there would be no beauty. Everything would be incredibly boring, right? Hence, from her alone shall come fulfillment to our dreams and our desires. And here again, he's echoing Keats's ode to a nightingale when Keats is lamenting illness, lamenting death. The path sick sorrow took, the many paths where triumph rang out his, whatever. But the knowledge of death does these things. It makes life sweet for us. It makes us value it. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? It's like, what? Those plums are going to be on the tree forever? And how boring is that? Our perishing earth, the rivers will never meet the sea. The shores will never touch. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mothers waiting sleeplessly. Now, the one stanza that I have trouble getting into because I can't imagine a supple and turbulent ring of men chanting in orgy on a summer morn. I mean, that just reminds me of Wallace Stevens with a men's group, dancing around in the grass. But he's trying to, again, once again, praise the creations of time. They're chanting their chant of paradise out of their blood returning to the sky. And then in their chant, in their music, in their poetry, if you like, shall enter, shall be revivified, shall come magically back into fullness. The windy lake, the trees like seraphim, they're not seraphim, but they're like seraphim. The echoing hills and fellowship, they shall know well the heavenly fellowship of men that perish and of summer morn. And now this magic, whence they came and whither they shall go, the dew upon their feet shall manifest. Which is to say, what? Like, you can't find them. They vanish. They come out of nowhere, as we all do, vanish into nowhere. And then this incredibly beautiful final stanza. I mean, who is it? Harold Bloom or Helen Bentley? Somebody says, oh no, it's Randall Jarrell says, nobody has written a more beautiful poem than this poem in American poetry. And I gotta agree about this final stanza. She hears upon that water without sound a voice that cries, the tomb in Palestine is not the porch of spirits lingering, it is the grave of Jesus where he lay. We live in an old chaos of the sun, or old dependency of day and night, or island solitude, unsponsored, free of that wide water, inescapable. Deer walk upon our mountains, and the quail whistle about us their spontaneous cries. Sweet berries ripen in the wilderness, and in the isolation of the sky at evening, Casual flocks of pigeons make ambiguous undulations as they sink downward to darkness on extended wings. So one thing to think about is, how do we know that sweet berries ripen in the wilderness? That is, this ends up being an eco poem. The berries ripen, they don't need us. They're not doing it for us. The deer walk upon the mountains, not for us. They do it because it's part of creation, it's part of their nature. The pigeons fly and they come down toward darkness, which is, you can say, okay, that's toward mortality, toward death, toward night. But it's ambiguous undulations. What does it mean? Does it have a meaning? We don't know. But I think that, like, a poem that's going to make an argument, and the argument essentially is this high modernist argument. This is a high modernist poem. We don't need organized religion. We don't need organized institutions. We can dwell in time, in mortality. We can embrace it. We can celebrate it. We can affirm it because it's all there laid out for us. And so, I think there's something to be said about courage there, that if we stop looking for some kind of final answer or final assurance or final changelessness, then we can just be in the world where the world which is divine divinity and ourselves possessing divinity. So thoughts on this poem? Yeah, Julia, you're mute. You're mute. You're mute again. Unmute. There, talk.
There you are.
Okay, sorry. The stanza, excuse me, I've just got messages in front of me. Okay, the stanza with the men chanting, to me, it was Stonehenge and the Druids, and it just seemed to me the power of paganism. It's shown, and I kind of liked it. So
Okay, you've just made me like that stanza better than I ever have before, because I could always just imagine Wallace Stevens taking his clothes off. You know? But you've just made me like it much better. Okay, great.
This
Thank you.
is my this is the favorite poem that we've read so far in this class for me. And there's two things about it. Maybe I'm mistaken in my interpretation, but one is that I've always noticed that any description of heaven has to use earthly things. The streets are paved with gold, etc. What else are you, how else are you going, choir of angels, how else are you going to describe it? But at the same time, I know that if I get to heaven, I'm not going to have the senses I have when I'm alive. Your senses can be destroyed by brain damage. You can be blind, you can be deaf. And what am I going to hear in heaven? If there's no hearing and sight, how am I going to experience what I experience already on earth? That's one thing. And then the line about death and beauty, I've told this before, but I realized I still remember the little epiphany I had when I was a teenager reading, of all things, John Stuart Mill, that I was going to die. And what that meant to me was that anything I wanted to experience, I couldn't put it off until
Yeah.
heaven. It had to be worked on, and I had to look towards trying to experience it while I'm alive. So it was the finality or the finitude of life that made life itself more 3D or something. The juxtaposition of finality with life. So that's how I took that line in anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's nice. Yeah. Other thoughts about this poem? Well, then we'll look at another poem. So let's return to our what
Yeah,
is next on our screen share? Screen share.
O-
yeah, just
Okay.
to say, the echoes of Keats struck me as you
Mm,
were reading it, and I think that this poem is another one that bears reading aloud.
hmm
That to me, it seemed reading it on the page did not carry the same, didn't open the same
mm,
thinking about what it was saying. And I think part of that, it is like a chant.
hmm
And it reminded me of some of the I don't know, the well, psalms or the things that people chant in church, only it's totally its weight is totally different. And
Yeah.
Keats is I think a little like that. When I was in seventh grade, we had to memorize Keats's Ode to Autumn, which I can still recite. If you could
Yeah.
memorize the whole thing, there was some sort of a special party with roasting chestnuts, gathering chestnuts at the end of the road, where my seventh grade English teacher always lived at the end of the road all the years that I knew him, which was until he died at 93 or something a couple years ago. But I can still actually say that. And I was thinking of the gathering swallows twittering in the sky.
Yeah. It's
Uh,
so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Deborah,
yeah, but
oh, go ahead.
this
Go ahead.
is it really it's posing questions that I wonder how much the woman sitting there on Sunday morning. The other thing that struck me was nobody here is going to church in this poem.
That's right.
So what they've already rejected the the vision that goes with you go to church and you are rewarded by this permanent. Um,
She still is having anxieties about that, you know.
so she's putting something in its place already.
hmm
It's not just sitting on Sunday morning drinking tea or coffee and eating pancakes or whatever.
hmm Deborah?
Did you say, or did I miss it? What were the parts that he pulled out and then put back in?
I
The
can't
stanzas?
remember, but
Oh,
Harriet
okay.
Monroe wanted him to take out two. Here's how I know that. I know that two ways. When Laura Gray and I were editing the Eco Poetry Anthology, we wanted to include Sunday morning. The publisher, Harcourt, said we could have the version that Harriet Monroe did free, or we could pay $1,500 and do the
Oh,
whole thing. Luckily, our publisher, our editor, managed to talk them down. But I just got to tell you, permissions can be a cruel business, you know.
hmm, hmm,
Williams, New Directions charges like $40 a poem, you know. Harcourt wanted 1,500, and that wasn't going to work. That
hmm,
wasn't going to work.
hmm,
Yeah.
hmm.
But so anyway, but I don't remember which two. And then I just recently read something about that too.
Hmm.
It's pretty shocking that she would want to publish it but not publish the whole thing, you
Yeah.
know.
Why? What was her reasoning? Was it just space, or did she
Maybe
object
space,
to the?
maybe space. I don't know. It was a very new magazine when she did that, you know. I don't know. I don't know. But you're not supposed to do that. Yeah. Any other comments about this poem, or shall we look at our screen share thing and talk about another poem? Tony, you're talking, but you're mute.
Never happened
Which
before.
one? Which poem?
Well,
I'll
just go
find
to
it.
screen share and we'll just go down through a little bit. Douglas, do you have?
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
it's okay.
There you go.
Okay, keep going down. Oh, Peter Quince is beautiful, but it's kind of yeah. Let's look at Peter Quince at the clavier. So this is based on the apocryphal story of Susanna in the Bible, and I assume that you guys all know that story. Susanna married to a very wealthy man. She was very beautiful. She liked to bathe in her garden, but these two old dudes lusted after her, and because she wouldn't sleep with them, um, they accused her of adultery, and they said a beautiful young man entered the garden and lay with her under a tree. and she was going to be put to death. And then Daniel saved her life by questioning them one by one and said to the first one, "So tell me, which tree did she lie down under?" And he said, "Oh, the mastic tree." And then the other one said a different tree. So Daniel said, "I have proven that they were lying," and they were put to death, and Susanna's honor was saved. So it's a very cool story. But Peter Quince, of course, is from A Midsummer Night's Dream. He's one of the rustics, right? And this is kind of an odd, it's a poem about poetry, and it's a poem about beauty. So I'll just read it to you, and we'll move a little bit more quickly through it. Peter Quince at the clavier. 1. Just as my fingers on these keys make music, so the self-same sounds on my spirit make a music too. Music is feeling then, not sound. And thus it is that what I feel here in this room, desiring you, thinking of your blue shadowed silk, is music. It is like the strain waked in the elders by Susanna. Of a green evening, clear and warm, she bathed in her still garden, while the red-eyed elders watching felt the bases of their beings throb in witching chords, in their thin blood pulse pizzicati of Hosanna. In the green water, clear and warm, Susanna lay. She searched the touch of springs and found concealed imaginings. She sighed for so much melody. Upon the bank she stood in the cool of spent emotions. She felt among the leaves the dew of old devotions. She walked upon the grass, still quavering. The winds were like her maids on timid feet, fetching her woven scarves, yet wavering. A breath upon her hand muted the night. She turned, a cymbal crashed, and roaring horns. Soon, with a noise like tambourines, came her attendant Byzantines. They wondered why Susanna cried against the elders by her side. And as they whispered, the refrain was like a willow swept by rain. Anon, their lamps' uplifted flame revealed Susanna and her shame. And then the simpering Byzantines fled with a noise like tambourines. Beauty is momentary in the mind, the fitful tracing of a portal, but in the flesh it is immortal. The body dies, the body's beauty lives. So evenings die in their green going, a wave interminably flowing. So gardens die, their meek breath scenting the cal of winter, done repenting. So maidens die to the auroral celebration of a maiden's choral. Susanna's music touched the body strings of those white elders, but escaping, left only death's ironic scraping. Now, in its immortality, it plays on the clear vial of her memory and makes a constant sacrament of praise. So let's go up to the beginning again. Okay, Tony? Thank you. So, just a few comments about this poem. Obviously, it's a poem about desire. Beautiful description of, thus it is that what I feel here in this room, desiring you, thinking of your blue shadowed silk is music, you know? It's a poem about music and about musicality and about desire and about beauty. And then it's a poem about what I would say the desire to rudely or aggressively or violently possess beauty, which is to say, essentially, rape beauty, take advantage of beauty, and the incredible wrongness of that. The elders, but I love that the thin blood pulse pizzicati of Hosanna. I mean, he's got a good sense of humor with his language, you know. And then Susanna is, highly sexual. I don't know what she's doing in that green water, but she's very happy when she gets out of the water and very spent. Her emotions are spent. And the elders want to attack her. And of course, they are trapped And then there's the final comments on poetry, the imagination, beauty. Notice how he handles things like rhyme and meter. So, for instance, we've got she walked upon the grass, still quavering. The winds were like her maids on timid feet, touching her woven scarves, yet wavering. And then all of a sudden, that's broken into a breath upon her hand muted the night. She turned, and you're expecting that there's going to be a rhyme word with night, but a cymbal crashed and roaring horns. So there's violent, abrupt music breaking the spell. And then you get this like jingle jangle meter. Soon, with a noise like tambourines, came her attendant Byzantines. They wondered why Susanna cried against the elders by her side. You know, that's the moment of confrontation, the moment of violence, the moment of gossip. As they whispered, the refrain was like a willow swept by rain. What's going on here? What's going on here? The gossip, the titillation. And then we modulate back out of that in section 4 with the poet's own commentary on beauty. Once again, beauty, insistence that it is mortal in the mind. In the flesh, it is immortal, not meaning that the body lives forever, but meaning that the memory, as preserved through poetry, lives. The body's beauty lives. So evenings die, so gardens die, so maidens die. But the musicality of the moment, the beauty of the moment survives forever in poetry. So it's like one of his early important poems is pretty early. And already he's touching on these themes of the importance of the imagination, the importance of poetry itself to preserve something that in a way becomes immortal, not because its flesh is immortal, not because it can be possessed in the flesh, but because it can be captured through art. So, I think it's pretty fair to say of Stevens, I mean, I called him a high modernist. This is modernism at its highest, this celebration of art, this almost like an art for art's sake aesthetic, this concern with matters of aesthetics, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I love the rhyme too, because so much of the modern, movement away into free verse, he's rhyming Byzantine and tambourine. I mean,
I know.
I love that.
I know. And Susanna and Pizzicotti of Hosanna. I
Mhm,
mean, he's
mhm,
he's very witty, and he loves words and he loves sound patterns, and they're
mhm,
gorgeous.
mhm.
Yeah, Brian.
Um, this poem is full of musical references, but I found the whole structure in four movements to be very much like a string quartet,
Oh,
a
cool.
symphony, where there's a different emphasis and a different rhythm and a different style, and these movements complement each other. They build in a way that a string quartet does.
Uh-huh.
This is a poem that's long interested me from the standpoint of possibly setting it to music. It's been done wonderfully already,
Uh-huh.
but the musicality of it is something that I really enjoy and something which in setting other poems to music, I like to work in groups
Uh-huh.
because the
Cool.
poems will talk to each other in ways that reveal things that aren't in the individual poems.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for pointing that out. Peter, who's not here, not in Massachusetts with me, and therefore not next to my side, um, doesn't like the fact that he calls it Peter Quince at the clavier. He says he's like, why is he kind of talking himself down that way, And I think that's a legitimate question to ask because, of course, all the rustics, all the rude, characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream are played for comedy. But maybe Stevens is saying something about the inadequacy of a mere mortal to capture this incredible beauty. In any case, there's a real opposition between the music of the clavier and the kind of goofiness of Peter Quince. Brian, do you have any thought? I mean, Douglas, do you have any thoughts on that one? No? Anybody
Um,
else?
yeah, and Would you help me with how you're using the word modernism in poetry? I'm not a
Sure.
scholar in this field.
Yeah, sure. Just real briefly. The modernists, it's a movement that really came into being around the time of World War One, a little bit before World War One, with, for instance, I've mentioned the armor show when Cubist painting first came to America, and when all these artists were working to kind of revolutionize art, you know. But it's a movement away from the pieties of Victorian art, and they thought of themselves as in rebellion against Romanticism as well, although that's really arguable. They thought of themselves now. It's a movement of experimentation in the arts. So, you know, think back to Williams, for instance, to what he's doing. It's a movement away from conventional forms in poetry, for instance, conventional forms in music. This is where atonal music, it's where modern dance, it's where Cubist painting, it's where experimental novels like Ulysses or the novels of Virginia Woolf, you know, come into being. And in general, as again, Spengeman, whom I was quoting, pointed out, these are people who were mostly born into pretty conventional, respectable middle class families, but they rebelled against that because they felt that the pieties were outdated, were no longer operable. They were ravaged by World War One. Even, you know, just to know that an entire generation of young men was lost on the on the battlefields in World War One. Eliot, of course, writes about the hordes of people streaming around the plains in the wasteland, and these are, you know, we think about the redrawing of national boundaries. We think about uh, the immigration, the homelessness, you know, as we see now too. So modernism is a movement in art that was super important. It's got a lot of Proust, Thomas Mann, um, uh, D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, Eliot Williams, Gertrude Stein, Wallace Stevens, uh, Miriam Moore, you know, and others in different art forms as well, are just trying to find sort of bold, new, experimental ways to create art, and an art that they would feel to be somehow commensurate to, for instance, the realities of Eliot says these fragments I have shored against my ruins, or with Williams wanting to write a poem called Patterson, which is celebrating and decrying, you know, industrialism and environmental damage, or Stevens talking about, you know, God is dead, right? Stevens, in some ways, was an admirer of Nietzsche. So modernism, and modernism too, as reflecting the influence of, in some cases, Marx, Freud, Nietzsche, Darwin, definitely Darwin, a world of time, you know? So it's just, and then it lasted into the 30s, but with the 30s and the Great Depression, people started calling for an art that would be more grounded in socio-political realities. And there are modernists who kept being modernists, like Stevens. But also art took a turn toward, you know, proletariat fiction or poetry of the masses and so on. So that's a little bit that I would say about modernism.
Where are we now? Are we still in the
Post
modernist
post
period?
no, postmodern.
And
Douglas,
how would you define that? If I don't want to bogart this
yeah, no,
question.
I know. Postmodernism is pretty much where, I mean, I can't really talk very intelligently about postmodernism. Douglas, I'm going to let you bail us out on this one. What would you say?
Oh,
Well, you're going to say
sorry.
something.
No, I was just going to say, well, for one thing, I wanted to thank Brian for his
Yeah,
observation on that, but also um, somebody, maybe it was Casey Stengel or Yogi Berra or something, said, I don't know art, but I know what I like.
yeah,
And that's really the way I've always read Stevens. I just loved I just
And
loved the poetry.
yeah,
So
that's
these discussions for me, I'm totally thrilled
oh,
because this opens up a whole new aspect of it to me.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, postmodernism is a further breaking apart of anything that could be believed in or held to be verifiable, you know. And I can't really talk knowledgeably about postmodernism because I'm not very interested in postmodernism. But if you think about people like Thomas Pynchon, um, who else? I can't really, I'll try to have something more intelligent to say later about postmodernism. Is a person. Hi,
Yeah.
you're here. Yeah, I am. You guys, thank you so much. Next time we will talk about, among other things, the Emperor of Ice Cream, and we'll see where else we get. Okay, thanks so much. And I'll be sending you some more later poems as I get time. Okay, take care. Have a good couple of days.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Happy New Year and safe travels.
You too.